Yeah, you never know how players are going to look at it because if you have guys who look at the depth chart and say, "Well, Jordan Davis is here and Milt Williams is here," there, guess what? They're going to be here next year, and then you start saying, "Well, you know, Javon Hargrave needs a new contract. We have to go year to year with Fletcher at 14, Javon's at 13. How much money can you pay the defensive tackle position?" If people start looking at it that way, and agents certainly do, they say, well, they're going to move on. Just what I said, they're going to move on from one of them.
Appreciate you streaming on into the deep end of the pool here with us Birds fans on Birds 365. McMullen and McDonald here on a day after a lengthy holiday weekend where everybody is getting back to work, including the Philadelphia Eagles with OTA action here. John just gave you a countdown. I needed to double check. I said, is my math this bad? Maybe you were just rounding out off. 103 days till
103. Now, yes. I just saw it on Twitter, so I didn't do the home. Somebody tweeted it's 100 days, not from the Eagles. Thursday night.
Eagles.
Yeah, for the NFL start of the season. I should say
right.
NFL
because this is one where, damn, I stink at math, but I can do this because we're at the 30th. 30 days in June, 31 in July, 31 in August. That's 92, and the Eagles play on September 11th. That's 103.
Yeah. So that's the Thursday night game. 100 days from the Thursday night NFL.
There you go. That's where you came up with the 100. Yeah, I'm tracking the Eagles since they don't play in that Thursday night game. 103 days till the first Eagle game this year, which means we're almost into double digits. A couple more days by the end of the week, we'll be down to double-digit days until the season gets ready. And with the Eagles in OTAs this week, one thing you gotta, I know it just seems like we're bending over backwards to give Howie Roseman credit, but sorry, if he earned it, he earned it. One thing the Philadelphia Eagles will not be dealing with that a lot of teams, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but enough teams around the National Football League are, is there'll be no quote-unquote holdouts, even though this is optional training activities. The O could be used differently, but with the Eagles, they do not have mandatory sessions. They've decided to keep it optional, but they expect a very good turnout for this. And we know nobody's not showing up because they've got contractual issues. All the Eagles are on board. Everybody is good with what they're earning this year. There isn't a guy who desperately wants to get his contract renegotiated and is put off because of it. There's nobody on a tender right now that doesn't want to be tendered and is threatening on holding out like a Jesse Bates in Cincinnati. The Eagles are pretty good at managing this stuff in previous years, but the fact that they have absolutely no one, John, that is not content with their contract coming into their first official workout means should be pretty smooth sailing for Nick Sirianni.
Yeah, it should be. I mean, that's one thing Nick was able to do as a rookie head coach. And, some might say it was a necessity because, and you had more hurdles last year because of the pandemic and still that throws of that, the protocols from that standpoint made things a little bit more difficult. There were still, I mentioned JC Treader earlier in the show, there were still haggling with the NFLPA and safety issues and protocols and all that kind of thing. So, in a lot of ways, last year it was more of a necessity, but I do think Nick kind of entrenched himself as that, for lack of a better term, the players coach, players like coach, who's going to listen to the players, going to pay attention to some of their needs. At least, certainly, that's how it's going to be spun. And they like the way things went last year. So even though they don't have to worry about the protocols, they said, well, let's just do the same thing again and scrap minicamp. And, I think it's worth saying, I don't think it matters. You know me, Jody. I don't think it matters. Certainly for veteran players at all. I do think it's valuable for young players and rookie players just from a comfort situation, getting to know the facility, getting to know the city, more time together with your teammates, ingratiating yourself in the building, getting to learn people, just getting more comfortable. Anybody who's ever started a job knows those first couple days, that's not the most comfortable feeling in the world. You don't know anybody, you're kind of thrown out in the middle and hey, figure it out and all that kind of stuff. And then as you go on, you get more comfortable and it becomes second nature. So I think all of that is real life stuff that not a lot of people think of. But I do think it's worth saying there's 32 teams in this league, right? 30 of them are having mandatory mini camps. Two aren't. And one of them's the Cincinnati Bengals. And Cincinnati Bengals, yeah, you can talk about the cheapness, but I don't think it's the cheapness as much as they are coming off the longest season in NFL history. Because obviously it was the first 17-game season. Plus, they were a wild card team that made it all the way to the Super Bowl. So they played as much football as you can possibly play. And nobody else has played all that. So they think, that was very taxing on the players and the roster and all that kind of stuff. So even that, it makes a little bit more sense from Cincinnati's standpoint. So the Eagles are kind of out by themselves as being the one team saying, we don't need it. And I don't think they do need it. And I think they're ahead of the curve, as we mentioned a little bit when we talked about the length of practices and they scaled back a little bit earlier. Now you're forced to scale back. They were ahead of the curve. They'll probably be ahead of the curve now. But what we were talking about with John Stolnish, Jody, and they underachieve, all this stuff is going to be brought up. And that's going to be brought up. It's going to be brought up.
Right. You mentioned Cincinnati being the other team that's not mandatory. I don't know why I'm defending the Cincinnati Bengals here. They won their division last year, so they weren't a wild card. They played wild card weekend, and with the new
yes, format, I'm sorry, you're right.
There's a whole bunch of teams that have to play wild card weekend. A lot of divisional winners have to play wild card weekend.
They changed it, yes. Longest, but they played as much football as you could possibly play. Longest season. That's the bigger part, but you're correct. Yes.
Rams and Bengals both played as many games as they did last year, which is more than anybody's ever played before. You're right. Let me ask you about a veteran Eagle guy who may or may not be there today or tomorrow or the day after, because you correctly pointed out the Eagles are certainly considerate of their veteran guys. Training camp that don't push them, don't make them work out. If you've been here, then they're going to cut you slack because you're quote unquote a veteran. Guy who certainly falls into that category is Fletcher Cox. And oh, by the way, I'm old school, maybe old school to a fault. I'd like to see Fletcher getting a couple drills next to Jordan Davis because they're going to be playing together for the first time this year. Don't know how Gannon's going to use that defensive line, maneuvering with the guys, how often Fletcher and he are going to be on the field together. But there'll be some, so I'd like to see him get a jump start on it. I don't know how much Fletcher is going to participate this week, as a matter of fact. And if there's one guy on the team, I just gave Howie Roseman credit for the fact that, at least as we hope, no one on this team is unhappy with their contract situation. That everyone, there's not a guy who's desperate to get a contract. They're talking about maybe extending him at this time. Nobody, I think, that's blatantly not happy with their standard, their slot with the Philadelphia Eagles. But they did change Fletcher's status this year, released him, took a cap hit before it, even more so after June 1st, and then re-sign him to a one-year, $14 million deal. Now, I would only hope that someone would sign me to a $14 million deal. But still, Fletcher has never been on a contract before where it's one and done, that the end of the road is there and you can see it. It's not a bad little road to be going down, but it is just one more year. Fletcher Cox's attitude coming into this camp, good, okay, tentative, maybe an unknown chip on his shoulder, goes both ways. Sometimes a guy comes in, 1 year deal, kind of a prove it type thing. Does he want to continue playing thereafter? major motivation. You get the absolute best out of them. Some guys play distracted. Some guys get ticked off. What do you think Fletcher Cox's attitude is as the OTAs start this year for 2022?
Well, I think we broke some news there that you're not holding out for 14 million per WIP on the potential weekends. So, but I'm going to fight for you. Jody deserves 14 million, so I'm going to fight for you. But as far as Fletcher goes, one thing, Jody, I was a little bit surprised at is when all this happened and they were coming to this deadline and said, well, we can't give you this money. They had the deadline for paying the large stipend. They said, time's run out. We got to release you. And at that point, I expected Fletcher to at least look around and say, well, what else is out there? I mean, he didn't. So that kind of tells me he wanted to be back with the Eagles. And they just needed sort of more time to work this thing out.
Let me interrupt here because you would know this better than I would. You say they didn't look around. I believe they did look around. Any agent,
it was real quick. I will say that. I mean,
true, but any agent worth his salt knows that the Eagles cap situation was what it was, and that was at least a possibility. And the good agent could pick up the phone. Listen, off the record here, my guy's still on a contract at the Eagles. Blah blah. If he hits the open market, how much interest would you have? I'm sure, and not every team is going to tip their hand and give him the exact answer that they want, but they respond to good agents' telephone calls. I don't think they just blindly made that decision. I'm sure that his agent did the behind-the-scenes work. Maybe they didn't hear what they wanted to hear, and he knew what the Eagles' offer was going to be, and $14 million, that's pretty damn good. Maybe we just snack this thing right up. Is there a chance that that's the way the whole
season? I mean, there's a possibility that the Eagles said, all right, we're going to release you, and we got this 14 million stipulated, and they might have gave him a time frame, but you got to make your decision in 48 hours, whatever it turned out to be. Maybe it went down like that. Mm-hmm. But more than the timing, more than how it went down, it was that it went down that way, and Fletcher was okay with it. So in a lot of these cases, I talk about it all the time. Guys are willing to take pay cuts, but not from their team that they were entrenched with. There seems to be a bit of, pride, whatever you want to call it, says, I did all this for this particular team. And in Fletcher's case, for people that don't know, this is one of the best defensive players in Eagles history. He's done a lot for this particular team. And a lot of times there is that pride. And you're saying, well, I'll go play for insert name, Green Bay, Kansas City. I'll go play for them for 10 million. I'm not playing for 10 million for the Eagles. Nice. In this case, that number's pretty big. 14, as you mentioned, it's still pretty big. So maybe it's just nobody else wanted to go there, and the Eagles did. But either way, however it kind of shook out, I don't think he's upset. I think he knew the landscape. He knew he wasn't getting paid. He knew something had to be done, and he's still getting paid a lot of money. So I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal for Fletcher Cox. But there are some other guys. You mentioned the Eagles. Miles Sanders is in a contract year. Javon Hargrave is in a contract year. They say all the right things, but they want extensions, and those things could sort of manifest itself, especially in the case of Javon, because I look at Javon and Fletcher Cox. One of them's going to be here next year. One of them isn't. So let's see how that shakes out.
Fair enough. But saying the right things is good. Actually acting upon it is another. Because there are a bunch of players around the National Football League that aren't going to be in OTAs this week. Even if you're saying right, you show up. That's showing up. There are guys that aren't going to show up. Guess what? Aaron Donald is not coming to the Rams camp this week.
No.
And
Aaron Rodgers isn't
he's only
doing
arguably
anything.
the best football player in the National Football League, and he's playing for a champion, and he's not showing up.
By the way, I joke about 14 million. What if somebody's giving you 50 million, you can't show up to OTAs? I mean, I gotta get that. I don't think Aaron Rodgers needs it. I don't think it's going to do anything for him, but I think it would do a lot for the young players in Green Bay that the quarterback showed up. And maybe if I give you $50 million, you should stick and show up. But that's me.
All right. Well, and the other guy's not showing up this week. Supposedly is Brady. But
same thing. Yeah. Show
Bucks,
up, Tom.
But then again, the Bucks pay him less than Fox is going to pay him to do games going forward. So maybe Brady actually does have a little bit of an issue to work out between he and Tampa. But you're right about Rodgers. Come on. It's just because that's his now modus operandi. Workouts, I don't need to work. I'm Aaron Rodgers. I don't need to work out. But yeah, the Eagles have none of these guys. None of the players, whether they actually do off the record, have an issue that they would have liked to, they would have preferred to get a contract extension done. None of them have spoken out about it. I assume that they're all going to show up. Don't know how much work. Hargrave has now gotten to the point where you would actually consider him a veteran. Sorry, Miles, you're still on that rookie contract, which means you can't be if you're considered a veteran. Not in my eyes, maybe in other people's eyes. But I'm really interested to see how many days Fletcher shows up and what they do with him, because he's the only one on this team that I can make for a guy that may have an issue with it. Again,
well, he hasn't talked to us. I mentioned that, Fletcher's one of the guys that always talks to us, and he hasn't talked to us yet this off season. And we've been doing 1 day a week. So we're through 3 days. We talked to a lot of players, and we haven't gotten to Fletcher Cox. And typically Fletcher Cox would have been on day one. He would have been one of those immediate guys. So yeah, maybe it's something to keep an eye on. I think the fact that he's here and he agreed to 14 million, I think everything's going to be fine, but you never know. You never know with money and pride and ego. And that's why I say with Miles Sanders and Javon Hargrave, same thing. You can say all the things, and Javon's here, and Javon's understated, and he talked to us, and he's used to it. He went through a contract deal with Pittsburgh, and he got a big deal with the Eagles. He thinks things will work out, but it's always on your mind. He knows he has to perform really, really well this season.
Right, because he got off to a great start last year with plenty of sacks in the first 4 or 5 games, and then the sack slowed down, and he did not rate all that well as a defensive run stopper, which means he's probably going to be playing less on first down than he was last year with the addition of Jordan Davis. And you're right, much like Fletcher Cox, he's on a contract year. So the Eagles' defensive tackle situation, while both of the guys are very good players and highly ranked and thought of players, they're both kind of singing for their supper this year, which, again, can cut either way. Either the guys are distracted and or a little ticked off, or they're hungry and they're out to make a point with a chip on their shoulder. Is Jonathan Gannon going to be able to play that game, get inside his defensive players' heads and keep them on the motivated swing more than anything else?
Yeah, you never know how players are going to look at it, because if you have guys who look at the depth chart and say, well, Jordan Davis is here and Milt Williams is here, guess what? They're going to be here next year. And then you start saying, well, Javon Hargrave needs a new contract. We have to go year to year with Fletcher at 14, Javon's at 13. How much money can you pay the defensive tackle position? If people start looking at it that way, and agents certainly do, they say, well, they're going to move on. Just what I said. They're going to move on from one of them. And they're both aware of it. On paper, it looks that way.
And if, oh, by the way, Fletcher is that guy, I think John correctly positioned Fletcher in not only where he stands with this team, but in Eagle history. He's been a dynamite contributor at the defensive tackle for years now here in Philadelphia, including a big-time contribution for the World Championship back in 2017. If they move on from Fletcher Cox this season, again, kudos to Howie Roseman. he did do the cap maneuvering and cap crunching that when I shouldn't say when, I say if Fletcher moves on after this season, no future money loss for the Eagles. The Eagles like to do those push the debt into the future type deals to get certain things done, and they oftentimes have a big dead cap salary hit number. It'll be zero with Fletcher Cox because he is on just a 1-year contract this year. They've already taken the dead money hit with the ending Fletcher Cox's contract last year. So that does put him in a very good flexibility position going forward into 2023. All right, McMullen and McDonald here with you on Birds 365. We'll take a quick timeout, and then we'll be joined by one of our faves, one of the best who cover the Eagles on a day-in, day-out basis. He does it for NJ.com. Chris Franklin's going to jump aboard Birds 365.